My name is Sheldon Xie, the research fellow at the Center for Globalization Hong Kong, CGHK. Welcome to the CGHK second session of the US-China Strategic Dialogue Series. So in the past week, we have witnessed the conclusion of the APEC Biden-Xi summit, and coinciding with the significant challenge faced by the Blue-White coalition in Taiwan, the failure to reach a consensus on the presidential candidates between the Kuomintang KMT and the Taiwan People's Party TPP has injected a wave of the uncertainty into the future of the cross-strait relations. So we find ourselves at a critical juncture in history where the outcomes of these pivotal events will definitely shape the future landscape of the US-China relations. Their ramifications are far-reaching, setting the stage for the next phase of US-China-Taiwan strategic triangle. So the paramount question is looming over us. How does consequential events intersect with the ongoing US-China dynamics? And what will the cross-strait relationship entail in this new competitive landscape between the United States and China? And how can the policymakers navigate this intricate relationship? So in response to the pivotal moments, the CGHK has initiated this dialogue series to comprehend the nuance of this evolving dynamic. Leveraging our geographical position in Hong Kong and drawing upon the expertise of esteemed scholars and practitioners from the United States, China, and Taiwan, our objective is to bridge the gap in policy understanding among these three crucial sides at this time. So let me introduce our really esteemed and distinguished panelists today for joining us. First, we got Mr. Jude Blanchett, the Freeman Chair in China Studies at the Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS. And we have Dr. Alexandra Huang, who is the Kuomintang's Director of International Affairs, and also the KMT's representative to the United States, a special advisor to the chairman of the KMT, and also served as a professor in the Institute of International Affairs and Strategy in Tamkang University. And we have Dr. Yawei Liu, who is a director of China program at the Carter Center and an adjunct professor of the political science at Emory University. So last but not least, we have the Dr. Peter Chiu, who is the chairman of the CGHK and the adjunct professor at the Hong Kong Baptist University. So together we aim to unravel the complexities, seek the insights, and foster a robust discussion that sheds light on the way forward in the cross-strait and US-China relations. Now I will turn the floor to our moderator for tonight's discussion, Dr. Chiu. Following his opening remarks, Dr. Chiu will guide our discussion, and each panelist will begin with a brief 5-minute remarks and followed by an engaging discussion afterwards. So we will conclude with a Q&A session with our audience, and before we wrapping up. Dr. Chiu, the floor is yours, and you can start your remarks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sheldon. Yeah, good morning and good. Yeah, actually, good morning, and on our side is good evening, because all your three guys are in Washington, D.C. So good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yeah. 5 days ago, the US-China summit was held. 5 days later, we're still talking about the impact of this summit, no matter in which regards. So today, we are going to talk about the summit, maybe a little bit more with focus on Taiwan Strait. Taiwan Strait is not only an issue regarding Taiwan Strait, but actually is also an issue in terms of in regard of war and peace. So let me mention a few facts which happened before and after the summit. Before the summit, Bonnie Glaser wrote in a piece, New York Times, which title was "No, Xi is not about to attack Taiwan." And now we know during the summit between Xi and Biden. So Xi told Biden that he never has a plan of attacking Taiwan, particularly during the period of time of 2027 and 2035. And today, SCMP which is South China Morning Post, publishing piece, an interview piece with the former ambassador of China to the United States, Cui Tiankai, where he said the Taiwan issue is a life and death questions. So now, maybe with this focus, in this regard, we can talk about whether the issue of war and peace is over the Taiwan Strait or not. I clearly remember Huang Jiezhen, Alexander, over 2.5 years ago. I think that was at the beginning of February 2021. Almost 2 weeks about President Biden took over his office. You appear in my show, but you appear in our webinar. And at that time, you were very optimistic, very optimistic. You say, yeah, the year 2021 should be a year of the dialogue between mainland China and Taiwan. But actually, at the end of the day, which was proven to be, to some extent, wrong, because, starting from the year 2021, occupying Taiwan or attacking Taiwan very radically has become the issue. But over the course of last few months, it has been coming down. We don't know why. And with the fact, which I mentioned before, maybe we can start with our discussion. So maybe I will ask Alexander Wang to start your points first. Whether you were too optimistic 2.5 years ago, whether that was correct for you to be optimistic, because now actually at the end of the day, Xi told President Biden that he has never planned of attacking Taiwan. But if this will be the case, how can we read what the former ambassador of China to the United States, Cui Tiankai, said to South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, that the Taiwan issue is a life or death questions? Maybe Alexander. 5 to mid.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Peter. I guess that all academics would live a lifelong experience of defending what he had presented and what he had in the previous positions. I think in 2021, there was 2 years ago, when Biden took office, I think there was no illusion that rather than we have more expectation that the U.S.-China relationship would have to be improved compares to the Donald Trump administration. That's number one. Number two is that when people talk about a possible military event or a war across the Taiwan Strait, suddenly became a kind of fashionable conversation. People started to talk about Taiwan's is the most dangerous place on earth, and Admiral Phil Davidson rolled out his Pacific Deterrence Initiative, setting for 6 years of funding, and led people to think about that there might be an action in 2027 at the end of Xi Jinping's third term. Now, over this summit just held a while ago, that Xi Jinping was reported saying that nobody had ever raised the issue or any timeline concept or involving any discussion with him before. So I think Cui Tiankai was not wrong and Xi Jinping was not wrong, because China had said both that they will never give up a military option to resolve the political differences across the Taiwan Strait. However, Xi Jinping, in all his public speeches, had reiterated that he would prefer to use peaceful means, even though we have witnessed a lot of so-called gray zone activities or military coercion surrounding Taiwan. But it was a gray zone, operation. So I guess the war and peace issue is not off the table. but rather I would say right now there is a high fever in the past 2 years across the Taiwan Strait. We have seen a lot of exercises and military operations, short of war. But our challenge today, especially linked to this summit, as a side meeting of APEC, whether we can bring the temperature down a little bit and maintain or prolong the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And I believe that's in the interest of all parties. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Alexander. We know that, unification or the peaceful or military unification of China has been always linked by China to some preconditions. We know that Taiwan shouldn't be occupied by foreign forces, that Taiwan shouldn't claim to be independent and whatever. But how can you read that Xi Jinping personally told Mr. Biden that he never planned to attack Taiwan, and no one around him mentioned any issue of taking Taiwan to him? Is this a political language, or is this something moving on behind that? How do you read, Alexander?
Oh, I think Xi Jinping, it was not necessary for him to come up with a staged story to misguide President Biden. I think is that several things. Number one, he believed that China has so many items in his toolbox that he does not need to go for a military option. That's number one. Number two is that he believed that a military conflict, especially after Ukraine, and the most recent large-scale military conflict, would also give Beijing a lot of headache, if not troubles. He realized that. And number three, he has a lot of priority issues that needs to address, primarily the Chinese economy slowdown. So with all these calculations, I believe that he has a reason to, slow down the strategic competition a little bit. So my overall reading is that, one summit would not resolve a lot of things. But summit itself is productive because it can, lower the temperature, or at least provide a period of, lower tension across the Pacific. This is needed by all parties, especially in the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Alexander. Jude, what's your take? Actually, eventual war between mainland China and Taiwan is not only a war between mainland China and Taiwan, it could be also a military conflict between the United States and China. And do you think that Mr. Xi Jinping and the former Ambassador Cui Tiankai, they're speaking the same language?
Well, first of all, Peter, thank you very much for the invitation to join this morning, and thanks to Sheldon for arranging it, and really delighted and honored to share the virtual podium with Yahweh and Alex. The unfortunate part about coming after Alex is I feel he just articulated my own assessment, but did it very clearly and very articulately. I don't honestly have much to add on that. I completely agree that this isn't two different messages being sent by Cui Tiankai and Xi Jinping. It's just opposite sides of the same coin. Again, I don't want to repeat everything Alex just said. Completely agree that I think the view from Beijing is they have a very robust toolkit. I also don't agree with the assessment of many in Washington, D.C., that Xi Jinping feels this high degree of urgency to, quote, solve the Taiwan issue over the next 2, 3, 4 years. My view is while Beijing may be concerned about some dynamics occurring in the Taiwan Strait, and especially in regards to, from Beijing's point of view, problematic developments in the US-Taiwan relationship. I don't think, therefore, that means that Xi Jinping is drawing up active plans for an invasion anytime soon. And in fact, I suspect if Xi Jinping is looking at the shape of US domestic politics and our own upcoming election and the prospect of a return of Donald Trump, that might actually give Xi Jinping the view that he has some options down the road, which he does not have right now. And this is my own personal opinion, and one thing that worries me about a possible return of Donald Trump, amongst the many things that worries me. Maybe just a few sort of additional points, Peter, and then I'll stop talking. Number one is, I think it's important to remember, for all the new attention to this issue globally and in the United States and elsewhere, this is a 74-year-old fault line that all sides have been managing. It's important to remember that in 1958, the United States contemplated using nuclear weapons as a way to try to deter military actions from China. Of course, 1995, 96, we had probably one of the most tense periods in the US-China relationship in decades. So this has been something which we have been managing imperfectly for almost 75 years. And I think you can't see this issue without understanding that broad trajectory. What it shows is, number one, this is not an easy issue to solve, and everyone coming to the table now with sort of cheap solutions on what we need to do to solve this. I think it's worth them reading a bit more history. Number two, though, it does show that this is manageable. I think while the United States' formal position remains that it wants to see this issue resolved peacefully, I think the United States is also happy to see that Taiwan has had the space to continue to develop as a democracy, develop its economy to become really a very prosperous, high-functioning democracy in East Asia. And I think the United States is trying to think about ways that it can continue to hold open that space so that as the two sides try to find some sort of mutually agreeable reconciliation, Taiwan is not squeezed, which gets me to my final point. Even though we have managed this issue for 74 years, I think everyone is beginning to feel like the status quo is becoming increasingly hard to maintain. And I think it's for a number of different variables. Number one is Chinese comprehensive power is and has grown significantly and is growing. I think you're seeing China have a much larger, more robust toolkit that it can bring to this issue. And as Alex said, everyone in Washington is talking about an invasion. However, the real challenge is day to day. Beijing is engaged in a very significant strangulation strategy. It is trying to minimize Taiwan's international space. You think, the waters and airspace in the Taiwan Strait is filled with the PLA on a daily basis. And if we think about, the upcoming election in January, Beijing is actively engaged in trying to shape outcomes there. So I think the attention in Washington needs to be focused a little bit less on planning for an invasion, although that is a function of the U.S. military. But I think more broadly, we need to think about how do we, what tools do we need to bring to bear to help maintain the status quo? And then my final comment is, I think you're also seeing that there are actions the United States occasionally takes at a very political level that in its own way destabilizes. I ultimately think the real challenge to peace and stability in Taiwan Strait is the fact that the PRC actively uses tools of military intimidation as a means of attempting to deter political developments in Taiwan. That being said, I think there are steps that the United States takes which are oftentimes unhelpful. I think the trip to Taiwan by then Speaker Nancy Pelosi did not fundamentally add to Taiwan's security or prosperity, and it did add a high degree of stabilization. It's notable that, over the past 3 decades, the last 2 instances where we've had something approaching a crisis, August 2022, and then 1995, 1996, those were not developments in the military domain. Those were political actions that resulted in Beijing feeling like it needed to reestablish its deterrence. I'm not agreeing with what Beijing did, but I'm just making an analytical comment that I think where you often see high degrees of volatility is where Beijing feels like it has lost its deterrence, and it feels like it needs to take very dramatic actions to reestablish that deterrent baseline. There are occasions where the United States needs to accept friction as it tries to maintain an equilibrium of peace and stability. But I think there are also times where the United States needs to talk less, take fewer actions that are more symbolic, and instead focus on the substantive means. So I'll end by saying I do think, although this is a challenging scenario, Peter, as you said, I think as Alex said, everyone knows what's at stake here. This is the possibility of a conflict I don't think the world has seen since the middle of the 20th century. Everyone needs to do everything they possibly can to avoid that. Yet at the same time, we also need to ensure that Taiwan has space to continue to develop and thrive. And really, at the end of the day, it's up to Beijing to find a better way to persuade the people of Taiwan that unification might be in their interest. Right now, it's doing a very bad job of that, which is why you're seeing, decreasing appetite in Taiwan for some sort of formal political negotiations to talk about an ultimate reconciliation. So I think really, as we think about this moving forward, the ball is in Beijing's court. Can you conceptualize and offer the people of Taiwan a future that they want to be a part of? And right now, as of 2023, and Alex can correct me later on, my sense is what Beijing is offering the people of Taiwan, they do not want. And so I think the election coming up in January is maybe a moment where Beijing can reconsider its approach, which has been heavy on coercion, light on persuasion. And I think that's Beijing's obligation here.
Okay, thank you, Jude. You mentioned clearly, the conflict over Taiwan Strait is manageable, even if the status quo is getting more and more difficult to maintain. Or on the other side, yes, on the other word, even if status quo is getting more and more difficult to maintain, but the conflict is still manageable. So maybe we can get back to your points later on. Let's first hear and listen to what's the take of Yahweh. Yahweh, what's your take?
Well, Jude says, it's hard to follow Alex. It's even more difficult to follow Alex and Jude because both of them have, again, said many things that I agree with. So I'll be short, and I have a question for Jude. So number one is certainly I agree with Ambassador Cui Tiankai. Taiwan issue is an issue of war and peace, life and death. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Secondly, I think there are rampant misperceptions on both sides. And I think it's right for Xi Jinping to say one of the 5 pillars of U.S.-China relations is both sides needs to have more objective view of the other side. Now, on the China side, the misperception is, U.S. is basically pushing China to go to war on Taiwan. I think to a certain extent, it's not 100% misperception. There is a significant part of the American elite, particularly in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They think Taiwan is a killer weapon to contain China. So they're pushing for sure. Now, on the U.S. side, the rampant misperception is Xi has a timetable that he is going to use force, either as early as 2025, as suggested by the U.S. Air Force Mobility Commander. He sent out that memorandum that was leaked. It's not leaked. I think it was given to the media. And also, like Alex mentioned, Admiral Philip Davidson, when he testified, he said 2027. So that's the misperception. I think the third thing I want to say, and Jude has said it very well, that this is a manageable situation. It takes two to tango, but it really takes three to maintain. I don't think status quo is a good word here. So we need to come up with a new framework. I think it takes three really to maintain, to prevent war from taking place. I think we all know from the China side, we all know, I think Alex made it very clear, I don't need to repeat, is that, for China to use force is not imminent. I think Xi has said it very well. He said a conflict between US and China is unthinkable. And Jude also mentioned that. I think both sides has a clear understanding. That has to be managed, and Biden has made it very clear. I think a more volatile issue is people in Taiwan. 23 million people down there. What's their aspiration? In the past, Jude said 74 years or 45 years. Taiwan basically has sacrificed sovereignty in exchange for peace, prosperity, and global respect. I want to emphasize, Taiwan does have global respect. I think mainland China should give Taiwan people more dignity, more respect, and allow them to operate more in the international arena. Therefore, people in Taiwan will continue to think that status quo is fine. And I think lastly, I want to stretch what Jude said a little bit more, is that of the three parties, I think the key party at the moment is probably the US in terms of maintaining peace, not to push China too hard. For Xi to say that China doesn't have a plan in person to use force against Taiwan at the summit in San Francisco, I think it's very meaningful. If you read very carefully, sort of the readout from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, he said, I hope US is going to support, I want to emphasize, peaceful reunification with concrete actions. That's what he said. And then you look at the readout from the White House. I think that's also very interesting. One of the things on the Taiwan issue is that it is expected peaceful resolution from two sides to resolve this issue. So I think it's getting close to President Clinton's 5 no's, 3 no's, is that this is an issue of people, Chinese people from both sides of the Taiwan Strait. It's your issue. Go ahead and talk about it. U.S. will not encourage, U.S. will not moderate, but U.S. should make it very clear. It's your issue. The only thing we'll disagree is the unilateral change of status quo. And the only issue that we will police is you're going to use force, then we're going to take action. So I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you, Yaliu. Yahweh, but I do see some difference between Jude and Yahweh. Let me try to follow up with a bit, not symbolic, but a bit aggressive questions. Actually, in whose hand is the issue? Is the ball now? For Jude, the ball is in China's hand. For Yahweh, the ball is in US hand. Actually, in whose hand is the ball now? Jude and Alex. Yeah, maybe we'll start with Jude first.
I didn't mean to box us in with a metaphor, because I think the some of the ball is in everybody's hands.
Yeah,
but if I can, if I can be perfectly honest, peace and stability, Taiwan is not looking to declare independence. The United States is not. There are some voices, far out in the extremes, which are calling for blowing up the U.S. one China policy, but the White House isn't. So Taiwan doesn't want to fundamentally destabilize the status quo. For all the occasional craziness from the United States, the position on one China policy here has remained, baseline consistent for decades. It's the PRC, I think, which is taking steps which fundamentally destabilize. Of course, I would say that I'm an American, so I respect and would love to hear alternative opinions. And I think, to build on Yahweh's comment, I agree, status quo is a bad term. It makes people think of stasis as events not moving. I think really what we mean is some sort of equilibrium where there is sufficient stability in the relationship between Taiwan and China, such that the two sides can find some sort of modus vivendi which is acceptable to both sides. I think the problem now is the relationship is very heavily tilted towards Beijing defining all of the terms. And that's the challenge here is you can make a long list of what Beijing demands of Taiwan for a good relationship, articulating the 1992 consensus, publicly agreeing to the one China policy. What is China willing? What is the PRC willing to do? What are the steps that they are willing to take that are accommodations? It's all very one-sided right now. I think the election again is an opportunity should Beijing choose to accept it. If they're again, it's an open election now. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. I'm refreshing my browser every second, and maybe Alex can give us some inside information to figure out what the heck is going on between Kowenja and Hoyoi right now, between the KMT and the TPP. So we don't know what's going to happen. If we assume it is a possible DPP victory, Beijing has a choice. It can either continue with a very unproductive approach, which looks to isolate and strangulate and is unwilling to engage in discussions with Taipei because Lai Ching-te will not publicly support the 1992 consensus. But I honestly think it's time Beijing starts to be a bit more creative in its approach. Beijing is not locked in here. It has choices. It has agency. If you look at Beijing's narrative on Taiwan over the past 74, 75 years, it has shifted wildly, right? There are times when Mao and Deng said, look, we got a lot of time. We can be flexible. Xi Jinping does not have to go down this path. He can make choices here. So, sorry, Peter, that was a long answer. I think if I am, who ultimately could completely redirect this complex relationship and put it on more peaceful grounds? Beijing. I think they're of the three parties, they're the ones who are doing the most to fundamentally destabilize, even as you can criticize specific actions taken by Taiwan and specific actions taken by the United States. The United States is not looking to formally recognize Taiwan. It is not looking to reestablish a military alliance. Taiwan is not looking to declare independence. So that should be a victory. That should be enough for us to work to create peace and stability. And yet it appears not to be from Beijing's side.
Yeah, maybe Alex can add some more or can correct. Let me put, first of all, one more question to Yahweh. Yahweh, you mentioned Clinton. Clinton said it's fully up to Chinese people on two sides of the Taiwan Strait. But don't you think that was the history 30 years ago? Clinton period of time was a golden time in terms of globalization. Everywhere was peace and prosperity and a golden time. But don't you think going back to 30 years ago, 3 decades ago, there was no Ukraine. There was no strategic competition between the United States and China. And there was no China's rise. There was no China's dream. Do you mean do you get what I mean? I mean, over the course of last 3 decades, a lot of things have changed. As Jude mentioned before, many years ago, China, there was always a shifting between Deng and Mao and Jiang, Hu and Xi. So all this strategic constellation framework has changed over the course of last decades. So maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me, Yahweh or Alex.
No, you're not wrong in terms of saying so many things have changed. Yes, so many things have changed, particularly in the last 45 years. After normalization, things have changed so rapidly, that's why there's growing concern on all parts. But I think three things will not change anytime soon. So the first no change is mainland China. Beijing is not going to give up, saying we're not going to use force on this. I think the second thing that will not change, that is U.S. will not say we're not going to intervene. And the third thing, I hope, all sides are going to come to agree, is that both sides, people on both sides, of the same culture, of the same history, of the same language, of the same blood, that they're not going to go to war again. I mean, they've been fighting, during the Northern Expedition. They've been fighting during the War of Resistance against Japan. But more, catastrophically, they fought 3 years before KMT, went to Taiwan. It's unthinkable for me that leaders on both sides are going to say, we're going to fight it out. And I mean, that's tragic. That's not only tragic, that will, stop talking about 5,000 years of civilization. If you have that, you can figure things out. You have that wisdom, you have that patience, and you have to embrace peace. You simply do not want to destroy an island that has 23 million vibrant people who really, I think, to a certain extent, represent the future of the greater Chinese civilization.
Yeah, but Yahweh, don't forget 2015, even 5 years ago, people all over the world wouldn't have been able to think about a war between Russia and Ukraine. Even 5 years ago, people wouldn't have been able to think about it. So maybe now, starting from now on, later on, in 5, 10, 15 years ago, right? In 10 years ago, nobody knows.
Yeah, I hope the stupidity of Putin is not going to be repeated. I do have a question for Jude. When you mentioned that Xi Jinping may have more option if President Trump is going to return to the White House, what do you mean that Xi will have more option?
It is now a matter of public record, and by Trump's own comments, that he does not have the same degree of fundamental concern for Taiwan than the current administration. Trump has made a number of comments indicating that he thinks we're focused too much on Taiwan, spending too much time on Taiwan. I also think a key element of the current Biden administration strategy as it tries to maintain that equilibrium of peace has been increasing the amount of international support for Taiwan and the number of stakeholders with an interest in peace and stability. That coalition building work requires an occupant in the White House who cares deeply about alliances and partnerships, who knows how to compromise, to work with external actors to build and strengthen coalitions. I think it's safe to say, based on the previous time in office, that Donald Trump thinks fundamentally different, sees alliances as burdens, sees external actors as free riding and as freeloaders. And so I think if I'm Xi Jinping and I'm looking at a possible Trump win, here's what I'm thinking. The US population will be polarized and divided. We're already seeing the Republican Party under Donald Trump move in a more isolationist direction. You're seeing some of this show up in votes on funding for Ukraine. 3, I'm thinking Donald Trump isn't going to expend much interest or capital on Taiwan, not nearly as much as President Biden or President Obama. And number 4, U.S. coalition building, which has been a feature of the current administration, is going to evaporate and atrophy. So suddenly, my space, me, Xi Jinping, I might have more options here, either to get the United States to look away, or some sort of compromised agreement with the United States that again gives me, Xi Jinping, more space. So I can't predict the future, but I think it's clear at a broad level that Trump will bring some of the same views of international politics as he had between 2006 and 2020, but I fear it will actually be much worse, and that this is going to open up the prospect for people like Xi Jinping to either have de facto permission or to miscalculate because he might think the United States just won't care. This is why it is vitally important that the United States, no matter the administration, be clear and consistent about its approach to its one China policy, but its approach more broadly to how it feels, what it is going to do to manage tensions. We can't have the pendulum swing from, dysfunctional, chaotic isolationism, back and forth to something like you're seeing in the Biden administration. I think it's very, very dangerous.
Okay, Alex, talking about in whose hand is the ball now, what do you think is the role which Taiwan can play? Is Taiwan a key player, as Yahweh said, for the role of the United States? Yahweh said the United States is a key player. And Jude meant maybe Beijing is the key player. And what kind of role can Taiwan play, no matter whether KPP or the KMT or the DPP is in power?
Well, thank you, Peter. You know what? In Taiwan, we consider, Washington and Beijing are both, super important players, and their thinking, their policy, their actions will, in the very larger sense, that shape, the environment or security geopolitical environment that Taiwan can have. So the ball, in common sense, the ball is either in Washington or Beijing's court, but Taiwan has to react. But let me lead us fall back a little bit, and actually in the coming years, there are several facts that Taiwan will have an election less than 60 days. And
Sure.
The election result could be interpreted by Beijing that Taiwan wanted to seek a kind of more peaceful, less confrontational, or more communication approach, or Taiwan voters will send a signal to Beijing and say, we don't care, what do you think? I think in the larger sense, it would be interpreted by Beijing or by Xi Jinping himself that what's the next course of action that he should take. Another is a very clear agenda that in November 24, there will be a United States election. I did my war game with the grad students with two scenarios. One is, the return of Trump. One is a poke a bear Trump. The other scenario is cut a deal Trump. But during the process of gaming, most of the Taiwan players believe that Mr. Trump will not engage directly kinetic conflict with China or with the People's Liberation Army, just like what the United States is doing, providing munitions and other support, but not committing American soldiers. So this is a situation, and lastly, a very important agenda is that Xi Jinping never said that he wanted to achieve a thorough, complete national unification in his third term. He hinted that goal should be reached by the second centennial, which is 2049. But he did say that he must quote unquote advance the process of national unification. So no matter what happens, in the next 4 years, the next presidency in Taiwan, the next government needs to deal with Xi Jinping's stated objective to advance the process of national unification. what are his KPIs? To what extent that he can say that I have moved forward toward the direction of national unification, and set that to the 21st Party Congress. So I believe that 2025, January 2025, when a new U.S. president swear into office, no matter who he is or she, I think that would be a time when, Beijing to do a more thorough review of what had taken place in the past several years and what would be the next, because definitely Xi Jinping needs to, prove before the end of his third term that he has done something better or more. That's the issue that we need to watch and take it seriously.
Now things are getting more and more interesting. You mentioned 2025 when a new U.S. presidency starting to take off office. I think 2.5 years ago when you joined my webinar, you mentioned 2027 when PLA will be celebrating its 100 years birthday. That was also a very significant milestone. Now we have 2 elections, ahead of us. One is in January, very soon in Taiwan. One is in about 1 year in the United States. So let's focus on the election results, as you mentioned before, in Taiwan in January. We don't know who is going to win, but we do know that KMT is definitely won't be solo, alone in power, right? Or do you think so? Sooner or later, or more or less, it's going to be a coalition between KMT and Ko-Wen-je, and so we're not going to predict what kind of election results, or maybe you might, if you can. Otherwise, we just think about different scenarios. Yeah, because election result in general in Taiwan will be very critical for the next forthcoming, assessment, either in Washington or in Beijing.
Yeah, I think, because of our own election agenda, when our friends in the United States started to enjoy their Thanksgiving dinner, that will be the end of the presidential candidate registration. We may worry for another 2-3 days, but the outcome will be clear before this weekend. And then I would say that, personally, I do not believe that a coalition is a magic solution, or non-coalition is the end of the Cross-Strait peace and stability. Something that we need to keep in mind is that, we talk about status quo. My narrative is that there was no communication line between Taipei and Beijing for almost 8 years. Taiwan, the relations across the Taiwan Strait had been sick for 8 years. And unfortunately, in the past 2 years, the Taiwan Strait caught a high fever, and the high fever is not getting down. So the election in January, to my personal view, is a choice whether we wanted to continue to have that high fever for 4 more years, or we need to pause that and think about how to turn this high tension, no shooting status quo to a relatively peaceful and stable status quo. This is a critical choice, Peter, as you had said. This is very important choice. So I think there are anxieties and people are worrying about our future, but I have to say that we are having this panel with a great interest. Part of the reason is that the election result may have a impact on the interest of all parties. but the electorate in Taiwan, I bet that most of the voters in Taiwan are not thinking of the geopolitical situation or the security environment in the next 4 years. They are still looking at the candidate or a specific policy, because Taiwan had been away from war for 65 years after 1958. So people are not psychologically willing to think that bad things may happen. And I think the danger of this perception is much more critical than the actual military actions or gray zone coercion.
So can we at least try to speculate about the eventual policy lines, both, for different scenario, for different coalitions? Say it's number one is coalition, and not coalition. Number one is for the scenario if DPP still will be in power, in office, but the political leadership on the side of DPP will be changed from Tsai Ing-wen to Lai Ching-te. Maybe it's going to be a union between Lai Ching-te and Xiao Meiqing. So in this scenario, what kind of policy lines will this new DPP political leadership is going to follow? And otherwise, on the other side, in case of a scenario of coalition between KMT and Ko-Wen-je, and then what kind of policy line are they going to follow? Could we speculate any signs?
I'm sorry that let me chime in in a few minutes. I think what we have witnessed is that William Lai, the current vice president, the DPP presidential candidate, in recent months, continue to read the text that President Tsai Ing-wen has spoken. He probably, or the DPP, think that this is a formula that would be acceptable by both Washington and Beijing. But my line, and everybody knows that William Lai is not Tsai Ing-wen. The national security team in the last 8 years will not be staying. That's a whole new ball game. And with William Lai's track records, I do not want to make my personal comments, but I would watch carefully that how Beijing look at, if there is a William Tsai presidency for 4 years, and how Xi Jinping can do, or what Xi Jinping can do, and how can he, manage this, high fever for another 3 years before his, 21st Party Congress. So there must be a lot of folders on the shelf and the items in the toolbox that Xi Jinping can himself think of, or the situation on the on mainland China would force him to pull one file out from the shelf or open the toolbox and exercise one or two. So the uncertainty would be a challenge for the neighbors. Any Taiwan scenario would be definitely a scenario, for Northeast Asia, and there will be a multi-theater challenges geopolitically.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so both Jude and Yahweh, you mentioned, some constructive hopes for the future of Taiwan Strait. Jude said, at the beginning, conflict over Taiwan Strait could be still manageable, even if, it is getting harder and harder to maintain status quo. And Yahweh mentioned before, it is up to 2 to tango, but people need 3 to maintain the status quo, and we need a new framework. I think in this regard, both Yahweh and Judy are speaking the same language. Now, I know Judy is about to leave in 5-6 minutes, right? So tell me, what's your opinion? What's your take in terms of manageable? To which degree could the conflict over Taiwan Strait still be manageable? So give me some sense in terms of how constructive we could be.
Well, great hard question, because and I just, hearing Alex's comments there, I do think the big unknown variable is precisely how much visible progress Xi Jinping needs to see before the 2027. Is that the 21st Party Congress? Yes.
Yes.
The 21st Party Congress. I will just say, though, and this is an open question, I think Xi Jinping is a mixture of increasing risk tolerance, but also still broadly in line with the approach to cross-strait relations many of his predecessors have taken. He is not on a fundamentally different approach to cross-strait issues than his predecessors. I think there's a lot of continuity in Xi Jinping's approach to this. It is an area where certainly Beijing is utilizing more tools of coercion, but oftentimes these are reactive. I think this is a good indication that Beijing is really out of good creative options for how to deal with cross-strait issues. If you think broadly about what Beijing has done since 2016, it's essentially mostly coercion designed to limit Taiwan's international space, try to limit the extent to which the United States and Taiwan can strengthen their relationship. And I think of a good article written by Phil Saunders at National Defense University, which is Beijing has a toolkit which can dissuade but not persuade. It can threaten the use of violence and coercion, which has the effect of stopping potential actions happening, but it hasn't found a fundamental way that it can reach across the Taiwan Strait and persuade inhabitants that there is a shared future together. So while I think these are manageable, I will just end by saying, I just think we also have to be very realistic. We've got new variables in the Taiwan Strait coming up. Number one is whatever happens in January, we will have a new administration. And there are questions. These are, there's lots of questions about how Lai Ching-te will govern. There's lots of questions about how a Hou or a Ko-Wen-je or a Hou Ko-Wen-je ticket will govern. I know Lai often says that, he's Tsai Ing-wen 2.0. The problem is the next 4 years are not simply a continuation of the last 4. This is a very different geostrategic environment. The number of issues that Taiwan is having to deal with in not only cross-strait relations, but we have a very complicated geopolitical world right now, conflict in the Middle East, ongoing war in Ukraine, a rethink of globalization and supply chains, which has profound effects on Taiwan. And of course, as everyone has mentioned, we might have a new United States president, which would bring its own variables. So I think as all of us look ahead at the future of this, we should be doing everything we can to try to maintain that peace and stability, while recognizing that the steepness of the hill we have to climb up has just increased significantly.
Okay, let me pick up just very quickly a question coming from the audience before you leave, Jude. So the question is, now the DPP announced the president and vice president candidates, and now Xiao Meiqin is the running mate of Lai Ching-te. Xiao Meiqin is now still sanctioned by Beijing. Will this VP candidate be more dangerous for cross-strait affairs? Xiao Meiqin served as representative to the United States for a long time. What could be the implications for her experience in diplomacy?
Just very quickly, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question that Xiao Meiqin or B. Kim Xiao, as we call her here, her choice is inherently dangerous. That's up to how Beijing wants to perceive this. Yes, she has very strong relations with the United States and also capitals in Europe and around Asia. I suspect that's one of the reasons the Lai Ching-te team selected her. Is she is a well-known quantity in Western capitals. I think actually that will probably send a reassuring signal to many external actors that they know know someone in Taipei. So I think again it's up to Beijing to decide if it wants to treat this without even having heard anything without the election even having taken place and without even hearing a word from any of these. I suspect other political parties in Taiwan may disagree with my analysis, but just to say, I think Beijing is boxing itself in to some extent by deciding right now that Lai and B. Kim are sort of rabid secessionists. I think again that's part of the problem for Beijing is it gets so wrapped up in its own narrative that it leaves it little flexibility on how to approach Taipei.
Okay, any comments from Yahweh and Alex before Jude is leaving?
Well, I think I do have a quick question for Jude. Is to what extent Congress is going to change the status quo? Or I think on the China side they do need to understand better the checks and balances system, but in substance, Congress can make things happen, right?
Yes. Yes. I tried to get out of this conversation without talking about Congress, Yahweh, because it's a variable of uncertainty. I think that Beijing oftentimes chooses to be a little bit too reactive to comments made from Congress, but it is our lawmaking body. What Congress does and says matters. I think you are starting to see some awareness in Congress about how much its words matter. I don't think it's perfect, but I think you're starting to see some additional maturity from the Hill. I think you saw this in relation to President Tsai's transit through the United States. That was a much more carefully managed event than Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, in part because I think members of Congress got a up-close view of how congressional actions can be unproductive. So I think you're right. Hopefully Beijing can contextualize which actions from Congress it's going to ignore because they're just statements. But I also think it's incumbent upon lawmakers here in the United States to think about ways that they can be substantively helpful to maintaining peace and security in the Taiwan Strait and really move away from theatrical actions or statements. But again, we live in a democracy. Lawmakers are often feel the need to make strong statements to increase their own political position. So I'm not wildly optimistic, but nonetheless, somewhat hopeful that there has been some evolution in Congress, I think, over the past year or so.
Maybe peaceful evolution. Let me put it this way. Okay, Jude, I know you have still some other commitments. If you want to leave, you may leave.
Thank you very much.
So let's
Thank you. Nice to see you, Jude.
Thank you. Likewise to you, and by Yahweh. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay, Alex and Yahweh, let's still continue our conversation for a bit 10-15 minutes. So here I have another question from the audience. What kind of cohesive strategies in Beijing's toolbox for Taiwan? How compelling the persuasive strategies that Beijing uses now?
Well, instead of commenting on the current Beijing policy or strategy toward Taiwan, I would focus more on whether the current leadership in Beijing wanted to have a persuasive, approach toward Taiwan. Because, 10, 20 years ago, we heard the slogan that China will prepare to talk, seek conversation or negotiation, prepare to fight, and can wait for a long period of time. And right now, it seems to us that that Beijing knows that there wasn't a talk for 8 years, and Beijing continued to prepare and stage up its military preparation. And the patience is seemingly running out in a sense. So the next few years, the next term of our president would have to deal with the remaining service term of Xi Jinping, his third term, and a possible new U.S. president. That requires the national security team of the next presidency super strong, super wise, and being very proactive, or otherwise, Taiwan will continue to be strangled and squeezed. And if there is another, DPP administration, let's imagine there are 4 more years without communication line with these, gray zone coercions, fighters, bombers, warships, operating near Taiwan for another 4 years without a war. What kind of impact on the economy? What kind of impact on regional security and stability? There are a lot of things that can go wrong in 4 years, and that's why we have been saying that it is so critical for Taiwan voters to think more on the security and interests and less on identity and personal preference.
So in terms of the personality of William Lam, Alex, what do you think? What kind of person he is? I was told that William Lam is more stubborn compared with Tsai Ing-wen. And is this right? Or is he more communicative?
Well, this is an open forum. It's not a private chat. Yes, I heard the same comment that you have just described, and it seems to me that's true from his former colleagues in the legislative yuan or people who know him. I do not know him personally. I have never met him. But my concern, Peter and Yahweh, the real issue, we all know for sure that William Lai is not Tsai Ing-wen. But if we expand the scope, and review what I have described about the situation or challenges in the next 4 years, is that whether William Lai will have qualitatively and quantitatively the pool of talent in national security matters.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they? After 8 years of DPP administration, how many left to lead the national security team, under William Lai, and can they handle those challenges that we have talked so far for about an hour? So these are, it's not William Lai personality issue only. It's the available pool of talents in national security matters inside the DPP, and I think it's even a larger challenge if they win the election.
Okay, Yahweh, what's your take? You mentioned before it's up to you. We need 2 to tango, but we need 3 to maintain the status quo. And you proposed we need a real new framework. So what's your take in terms of this new
Yeah, I think in terms of the candidate, or if William Lai is going to get elected, I think we should not bet on the past of this person, to make conjecture of what's going to happen in the future. I think if you look at Richard Nixon, at his past, he was diabolically anti-communist. His whole career was built on anti-China, anti-communism. So I always believe that with a DPP leader, he politically is in a much better position to negotiate with mainland China. Although many mainland China scholars do not buy my argument, but I oftentimes say, look back at what President Nixon did, in 1971, 72. Maybe Alex is right. His national security team. Kissinger is the national security advisor, but I really don't think Kissinger was the one that took the initiative. It's Richard Nixon. I think Kissinger had been given way too much credit by.
Oh, the internet didn't work. Yeah. It could be the problem on the side of Yahweh. Hello? Are you still here, Yahweh? Internet. So maybe Alex?
Yes, you any new questions?
Yeah,
No,
I have a question. I have
sure.
a question from audience. So as long as Yahweh is off the line, offline. So the question is, most commentators in Taiwan, including Zhao Zhaokang and Dr. Lei Qian, argues that the 2024 election in Taiwan is the choice of some military conflict between is a choice of between war and peace. But if Lai is elected, will mainland China and Taiwan must mainland China and Taiwan end up in a war or military conflict? Does Lai, Qingde, or DPP have, or are they ready to have a communication channel with mainland China in order to lower the Taiwan Strait tension?
Well, I think all parties, especially across the Taiwan Strait, most of the decision makers understand the high cost of a military conflict, and that the pace and the cost of modern warfare is almost beyond our imagination. No matter your inventory, no matter how much training you have, war will consume most of your ammos. In the first 3 weeks
You're an expert
or a
of
month.
war game, right? You're an expert of war game.
Yeah. So you want to have a quick, result before international intervention. That's one thing. But if you do not have a blitzkrieg or shock and awe or decapitation type of military assault against Taiwan, then you turn into a disadvantaged position, because the international reaction would not be only military, but other issues. And don't forget that Taiwan contingency is only part of the picture. If there is a prolonged, let's say, more than 2 months of kinetic military conflict, I think Korean Peninsula and South China Sea or even the Sino-Indian border would have to be taken into consideration by the Central Military Commission in Beijing, that whether they are able to deal with multi-theater challenges, and because China has been away from war for 44 years after Vietnam. So sometimes I joked, I said Taiwan doesn't know how to fight for 65 years, and the PLA did not fight for 44. So both sides of the Taiwan Strait are not in the major league. The
Right.
ball game would not be as interesting as the professional teams.
Okay, Yahweh, you are off the line for a short while, technically. Now, please continue with.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure, very good.
Okay, yeah, I don't know where I got lost. I meant to say that do not bet on the past of a politician, to make conjecture of the future. My second point is mainland China cannot wait for another 4 years or 8 years because after Tsai Ing-wen became the leader, and the strategy or tactic of mainland China is, they're not going to talk. But by punishing her, China has actually punished 23 million people on the island of Taiwan. They have lost the heart of the people on Taiwan. I traveled to Taiwan. I saw how the tourist industry was literally wiped out by this coercive policy of mainland China. And now, how long are you going to wait until you say, well, because this person has not recognized the consensus of 1992, therefore we're not going to talk to the person? How are you going to cultivate? You always say, oh, we pin our hope on the people of Taiwan to realize the eventual reunification. No, I think the people, Alex talked about the national security team, who are surrounding the leaders of China, whether they're able to get the accurate information about the people, about the politics of the island to the leader. That's very important. So I urge mainland China side to look more at how they handle the Hong Kong situation, so that they're not going to err again, and losing more people on the island of Taiwan. Time is really short. Thirdly, I think there are variables on mainland China that does demand more attention. One is, Alex is talking about multiple theaters. I think probably more than that is, how ready the PLA is in doing anything in any of the theaters, and secondly, to what extent you have in the popular support. If you're going to decide to use force, I think a recent study by the professor at the University of British Columbia indicated that airtight popular support to use force against Taiwan actually doesn't exist on mainland China. If you consider that the censorship on these issues is going to be lifted, then I think you have a much better public opinion environment for the leaders to operate. So do not box yourself into believing that 99% or over 90% of people will support you, that you're going to use a radical means to achieve something that is probably not realistically realizable.
That, of course, is a very wise suggestion. Yeah, but don't you think you will be disappointed maybe some years later on? Because you mentioned Hong Kong and you mentioned, okay, anyway. Okay, you mentioned a new framework, Yahweh. You mentioned new framework, and you mentioned it's up to 3 people to maintain the status quo. So I would be keen to listen from your side, what could be the new framework for you? And maybe later on we can listen to what Alex is going to comment.
Yeah, Jude mentioned saying the status quo is a bad term, and he mentioned equilibrium. I don't have a better choice of word. I think all 3 sides just need to believe that you should stop doing things to radicalize the situation. You should stop doing things that will instigate, poison the situation, so that you are yourself compelled to use force. So I'm writing this article that will come out probably in a few weeks. Is what should 3 sides do? And I do believe, if we use that sports analogy that Jude doesn't like, I think the ball is in the court of the U.S. It's not on Xi Jinping. It's not on Taiwan. It is really on the U.S. If U.S. can basically say, this is an issue of people on both sides of the strait, for them to resolve peacefully, we're fine with it. I think U.S. should be more proactive. Should 2 sides, you should talk. I always think about the Xima Hui in Singapore. That was such a lost lost the opportunity for them to do something. They met, but they didn't do anything. I don't know.
That was
what
just a
was
one-day trip from Ma Ying-jeou coming from Taipei to Singapore to meet Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
Just for one day.
I hope there will be another summit.
That was
talking about
exactly 8 years ago. Yeah, now we are in the middle of November. Yeah,
Right.
2023.
Yeah.
That was exactly 6th or 7th of November, 2015. Right. Time flies. But going back to 8 years ago, the world was still a lot more peaceful. 8 years ago. Okay, Alex, what's your take on the suggestion?
I don't. I know it's interesting. We can talk about the dynamics and how to define a status quo for another hour. But I think my take is that instead of looking for new formulas, let's face the reality. Because there are so many variables that out of our control or even imagination. So what we need to do is, as Yahweh has said, that we try to do things to reduce the fever. We do things to promote even a 1 inch more stability and buy time. Because I think, the United States, China, Taiwan, we all had urgent domestic issues. Taiwan is short of energy, is very challenging if DPP continue to be in the government, that we will lose all our nuclear power plants in December 24. And China, of course, has its economic downturn, and the United States has a very dynamic election coming up in the next year. So nobody can afford to have a unwanted or unintended incident or unwanted military conflict. So we all need to buy time. Give us more time to sort out, to think of innovative measures that we can all live and hope for the future. In Taiwan, I have always said that no matter which way Taiwan choose, as long as there is no political liberalization, no matter which party is in power in Taiwan, will continue to face this kind of issue. So the real key is that to do whatever we can to prolong the stability. And remember, always remind ourselves that short of formal declaration of Taiwan independence does not give Taiwan a free hand to do whatever desinitization or to intimidate China without a formal declaration. I think the range of tolerance is shrinking, and Taiwan people should understand that.
Yeah, I like the word you mentioned before, innovative measures. Yeah, and also I have 2 questions come from the audience. One is especially for you, for Dr. Huang. The question is, from the position of the KMT, what is the KMT's unique leverage to reduce the fever, as you mentioned before, over Taiwan Strait compared to DPP?
Oh, thank you for this question. Number one, we have a smooth communication line. We have cell phone numbers. Not only numbers, we know who we are calling, and they know us. So these kind of communication channels is not, doing political negotiation. Is to verify the facts. Avoid unintended incident, reduce threat, and prevent crisis. I think communication line is number one. Number two, KMT has a ambiguous common ground with Beijing, which is with a head called 92 consensus and subject to different interpretation. That's number two. And number three is that KMT has a much larger pool of talent who had extended decades of experience with both Washington and Beijing. And I think in all, KMT has a better, foundation to maintain such communication and peace and stability. I think people would not mind. I think Taiwan people wouldn't mind that in the next 4 critical years, that a change of government to KMT is a bad thing.
Okay, last but not least, Yahweh, give us 1 or 2 key sentences to run up, to give us a little bit more wise advices and suggestions.
No. That's hard. I think, again, I don't want to repeat myself. That is, avoiding war for the, I think Americans here probably would love to see a war in the Taiwan Strait. Many of them, although Zhu doesn't agree with that, he said that's a very small minority. I mean, majority of the American people, they probably want to see peace, but it's not the situation with the elite. So I think leaders on both sides of the Taiwan Strait needs to realize that they are of the same people. In Taiwan, I met with Alex, during the summer. I met with some of the candidates. I think the best term I heard is 以拖在待变. Just get the stability there to avoid a war, and eventually, I think things will be such that politically will allow people on Taiwan to contemplate that in one shape or form that there will be a symbolic or nominal reunification. I'm not losing hope on that, but again, 32 million people on Taiwan, it's vibrant, and I want to emphasize that's the best hope for the greater Chinese civilization. And let's wait for that moment to take place, whether it's 20 years away, beyond 2035, who cares? As long as we can prevent war from taking place, we can wait forever. 1.4 billion people on this side and 23 million on the other side, they can wait for that moment.
As long as peace is moving on, right? Okay, thank you. In this sense, thank you very much. Okay, last but not least, let me ask Sheldon to run up.
Yeah, thank you for coming to our session today. Thank you all the colleagues, friends, and scholars, reporters, students. We have seen in your chat box and you see your inquiries and it's all the great questions that you ask. Your active participation in this crucial conversation holds immense values, and we collectively navigate this pivotal moment in this global affairs. Let's give it a round of applause for all the panelists for today. So they did a really great job, and they really share a great insights and really insightful arguments for the cross-strait relations at this pivotal moment of history. So should you have any questions or concerns or share interest for collaboration among the research institutes or employment, I encourage you to explore our CGHK website and don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email on the mailbox if you have any questions for the recording or of these sessions, or even you have more questions on me or on our panelists, just don't hesitate to email me. Your input and engagement were really instrumental for us to continue our quest for a deeper understanding of this the complex world. So thanks once again for for this wonderful panel, like especially Dr. Huang and Jude and also Dr. Yahweh Liu. So we hope that we can see each other once again, either on Zoom webinar or in person in Hong Kong. So have a good night and have a good rest of your day if you are in the US.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Yahweh. Be well.
Thank you.
Be well in DC. Yeah, be well. Yeah. Okay, be well, everyone.